Camp, and this is the Faith and Culture Commentary series. Today, I'd like us to put our philosophical hats on. I want us to think logically, and I'd like us to think critically about everything happening in our world today. Personally, the way I see it, the media is responsible for all of the discord and delusionment that is happening. Now, yes, is there evil involved? Yes, and we're going to talk about that. But it's just over the top. We have people believing things that are not even true. They do not correspond to reality. And one of the biggest questions in philosophy is the thought of why are we here and how did we get here? And what is real? And what is not real? What is in our imagination? Most everyone is familiar with the philosophical muse that poses the question, if a tree falls in the forest and there is no one there to hear it, did the tree really fall? I'm paraphrasing the exact wording, but most of you understand. One could also ask, was there even a tree? These questions challenge not only the validity of a fact, but they also challenge reality itself. Oddly enough, this is where we find ourselves today. The cognitive dissonance happening in this day and age is absolutely astounding. It is almost as if there is a large portion of the American population that refuses to recognize reality and those who intentionally live in a made-up world. This ignorance of factual data is highly perplexing, especially for those of us who are thinkers, and especially in the light of the fact that the 21st century has brought with it an information overload. Access to up-to-date data is nearly instantaneous, yet there are millions of individuals who seem to be turning a blind eye to reality. It's difficult to comprehend the power of suggestion that looms over and controls the minds of those who choose to deny reality. There is a level of intentional ignorance that is the type of psychological distortion from which case studies are made. If you've been to college, you understand what I'm talking about. There's always a case study. I know there is in business school, and I'm sure there are in other disciplines. A closer look at the source of this lethal power of suggestion being used on the masses is needed. The instrument being implemented is none other than the media. We know this. With the help of the legacy media and the cable news networks, a slow and steady march toward a captured people has allowed for the infiltration of nefarious actors into the institutions that provide a framework for our country. I cannot speak for other countries. However, in the United States of America, there's a serious disease of intentional blindness that has spread into every corner of the Union. Most recently, the BBC in England was caught editing a tape to mislead the public as to what President Trump actually said on January 6, 2021. How many other people has this happened to? The difference is, I think the people over there realize that their media is corrupt and one-sided, but the people in the United States, they don't want to face it. And those who have no longer watch. What a waste of time. One case in point is the reluctance of many to believe that the government has been formulating bioweapons and using them on the American population for well over 50 years. This is baffling, even after everything that we have been through. In fact, many individuals become belligerent when the topic arises in a conversation. Obviously, they never had family members go to war. The reality is that the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, otherwise known as DARPA, working together with the Department of War, formerly the Department of Defense, and I would wager the CIA as well, have been openly creating gain-of-function biological weapons on United States soil for decades. One does not have to look very far to find not only the patents on their creations, but also the contracts and grants that have been awarded to state-funded and private universities to advance these super pathogens and bugs. Yet the naysayers continue to look the other way. No trees to see here. Critical thinkers that included successful physicians, scientists, patent experts, attorneys, professors, and many other professionals began to wake up to the cognitive warfare and incongruities of the bizarre events that began to unfold in early 2020. Respected physicians and scientists were censored, while drug addicts, like George Floyd, were hailed as heroes of the people. The vast majority of the civilized world shut down in lockstep and traumatized their respective citizens with draconian measures that went against every healthy standard known to mankind. Sunshine, vitamin C, exercise, fresh air, all of this because of a perceived invisible enemy. The reality was that the chances of dying were a mere 0.003% for those who succumbed to this flu-like viral infection. Those who did die from the weaponized flu were the older population, who are more susceptible to catching the flu every year. Yet everyone was lied to and told that everyone was susceptible and would die unless they shut themselves up and wore masks that didn't even work, were proven not to work, say on the side of the box they don't work. For that, wake up, we need to think critically. To top everything off, the complicit media touted that the numbers of deaths were in the millions in order to create an atmosphere of fear. Well, it is well known that fear is often used as a tool to control entire groups of people. In totalitarian regimes, of course. This is not new. They keep the information from you. See, numerous experts were silenced and lost the high-profile positions that they had worked for their entire careers. Once they began to warn the public about the experimental mRNA-modified RNA, of course, it's synthetic material, not organic, these experimental injections that were introduced in 2021. It did not take long for millions of people to actually begin dying from these gene therapy injections. And once again, the media lied to the people and went out of their way to deny that it was the injections that were the cause. No trees to see here. For those who were and are honest with themselves and have the ability to think critically, it was obvious what was going on. The ignorance of the physicians who continued to toe the corrupt medical institution line only exposed their own ignorance and their arrogance, as they remained too lazy to educate themselves about these experimental medical devices. These are the physicians who, in my opinion, should retire, as they pose a serious threat to humanity. The medical industry has exposed their corruption on a mass scale over the past several years, and critical thinkers have begun to shift their medical needs to functional medical practices and naturopaths. There are those, however, who refuse to live in reality, as they continue to put their full trust into the hands of the blind and inept medical practitioners, who are funded by the pharmaceutical industry and the corrupt insurance alliances. These are medical decisions that will make the difference between healthy living and dependence on a corrupt medical system that is designed to keep one at the mercy of pharmaceuticals in perpetuity. Aside from the medical malfeasance and the ongoing willful blindness that is a danger to one's physical health, there has been a systematic perversion of the educational system that has deliberately hindered students from learning how to think critically. One of the many ways this was done was to completely remove any teaching that hinted at a biblical worldview. In the late 1800s, universities began to purge any professors who believed in creation and remained skeptical about the theory of evolution. This allowed for the theory of evolution to gain unobstructed traction in academia. Eventually, textbooks at every level taught only the theory of evolution. Meanwhile, honest scientists were finding it increasingly difficult to defend Darwin's theory of evolution, as they were discovering more and more evidence for intelligent design. Even in the 21st century, faculty are kept from giving students scientific findings related to intelligent design. In some cases, students are literally told that even though what they see through the microscope looks like design, they must remember that it is not design. The evolution tree is falling, but that fact is being intentionally ignored, and people are told to look the other way. There is no tree falling here. Here again, we have a willful blindness that hinders not only spiritual growth, but denies reality. However, at some point, scientific facts must be discussed, or the science communities will lose all credibility. In some cases, I think they already have. Knowing this threat, Findings such as the flagellum motor will be presented, but the evolutionist community will not explain how it could have possibly evolved using their atheistic theory of selection. This begs the question, why would the scientific community hide the truth and behave in a subjective manner rather than taking an objective posture like they are supposed to? Why do they fear the evidence for intelligent design? Could it mean that if the educational institutions begin to admit that their theory of evolution is academically unsatisfactory, and that intelligent design seriously challenges their atheistic views, that they realize that their house of cards is about to fall apart? Logic tells us that intelligent design requires an intelligent designer. Furthermore, an ultimate designer would require boundaries for his design. This would inevitably lead to an absolute moral code. I believe that is at the core of this radical avoidance behavior. So, who is hiding these trees? I believe the mockingbird media and global control. This is intentional. Most normal people sense that there is something seriously wrong happening in our world today, but they cannot seem to put a finger on it. The fact that we have a complicit media that are all owned by the same individuals who have control of the major institutions around the globe is indeed our biggest problem, and in my opinion, our greatest security risk here in the United States. Without the gatekeepers of information as the mouthpieces for the globalists and Central Intelligence Agency, who both keep the American population fast asleep, these nefarious actors who operate behind the scenes would not get away with the crimes against humanity that they get away with. Without the constant drumbeat of propaganda, a larger percent of the population would be aware of the incongruities happening all around them, but they are really fast asleep. All indications point to the reality that there is a shadow, unelected government that works against the wishes of the people. Who are these bad actors that are running the show? And what is their end game? There's a network of institutions that have infiltrated our once trustworthy foundational infrastructure that made America a global leader. The two that I point out here are the medical and educational institutions, but there are many more, and they're working in conjunction. The current medical system in place has been proven to work against the patient. The educational system unapologetically works against the reality of moral absolutes, without which a society is destined to implode. How do we find the metaphorical trees behind these nefarious activities, when those foot soldiers that carry out the schemes of our enemies are protected and hidden by globalist money? Those trees that are the cause of the turmoil and upside-down world in which we currently find ourselves need to be rooted out. But how? How do we uncover the hornet's nest? Those individuals who begin to expose the corruption of the government, the medical field, the pharmaceutical industry, the educational institutions, the banking industry, the media, or any other industry that our society depends upon, which are many, are censored, bankrupted, swatted, extorted, or permanently silenced, and otherwise suicided. Censorship is very real, and it happens in every field and at every level of society. I personally know several doctors and registered nurses who have been censored over the past 10 years because they were actually healing their patients. Wow. I also know those in academic research that have been censored and have been moved out of their tenured positions when their findings go against the prevailing narrative of evolution. Many of them have had to hide. Many of them have had to publish books under fake names just to save their positions, because that's how they earn a living. All the pieces are beginning to fall in place for me, and I hope they are for you too. See, far too many people in this country prefer to turn a blind eye to the incongruities in the medical and educational systems. These are the ones who deny anything is wrong because they do not want to fight for what is ethical. Fighting gets messy. Ignorance is preferred. Does this mean that ignorance is bliss? Well, it may be bliss for a while, but in the long run, it will end up killing you and others around you. Those who choose ignorance, either willful or as a result of poor critical thinking skills, have not yet been jolted out of their slumber. This is due to a coordinated attack of the mind over the past 60 years to frame a narrative that frames a humanist worldview for the viewers. As for those who profess to be Christians, why they're still asleep? Honestly, I don't know. It's mind-boggling to me. Personally, I turn to these seeker-sensitive churches, these traditional churches that are so afraid to mention anything about the outside world. So they stay in their little cocoons, and their parishioners depart and live in the real world just like the average person, and they never put two and two together. However, for those who think critically, they see the trees through the smoke and mirrors of the artificial forest. Nevertheless, those who begin to speak up against the mainstream narrative are quickly censored. Censorship is a tool used by governments to hide the metaphorical trees that they intend to knock down when no one is around to hear them fall. It is a tactic used to cover up what they are doing in the shadows. Censorship was heavily used recently during the pandemic exercise that unnecessarily ruined the lives of millions around the world in 2020. So what is going on? What is their end game? In 1968, Paul Ehrlich wrote a book called The Population Bomb that incited global fear of overpopulation in the world. Organizations were then formed to control the masses around the world in order to preserve the necessary resources needed to survive. This atheistic worldview saw overpopulation as a threat to survival and would require efforts to ration or control resources like water, air, and our God-given right to own property. They felt that they needed to form a world government to rule over those who were not as wealthy, which happens to be the majority of the population on the earth. I think it was George Carlin who said, "They're in a club and you're not in it." I think that's what he was talking about. This is the evolutionary survival of the fittest stance. This is why they think that way. The wealthy and their pawns would eventually gain control and set up a non-elected world government. Ever heard of the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, the International Monetary Fund, etc., run by the wealthiest people on the planet? These are non-elected, self-appointed government officials of a world government. Wake up. This is the system of the beast, and Christians need to be aware of what is going on around them. Eugenics was one of the first noticeable tools that they would use to cull the population growth. At first, it was used to target people whom they, Margaret Sanger and the Rockefeller family, to name two, did not want to see certain people procreate. This included ethnic populations who were targeted first, along with those who were born with handicaps. Same is happening today, only their tactics have become much more brazen and militant and secretive in hospitals as they twist reality and have convinced the ignorant that it is a woman's right to murder an unborn fetus. Did you know that in Canada, the government encourages those with depression to consider euthanasia? Think about that. These are only two of the strategies being used by those who hold an atheistic worldview, used to control humanity. This is not of God. Fortunately, many spirit-filled Christians began to see the truth, and the lies of the enemy became clearer. Those who were silenced became the trees that very few were able to hear fall, as the mainstream narrative denied that these Christians were saying that abortion is the modern-day form of the pagan practice to the ancient god Molech. Christians are also the ones holding back the political pressure to institute euthanasia for those going through mental trauma. As image bearers of the Creator, all life deserves dignity. Jesus told his disciples to be wise as serpents and gentle as doves. I see the gentle going on, but where's the wisdom? A biblical worldview is imperative to understand the times. God used the prophet Hosea to warn that God's people were perishing for lack of knowledge, even before Jesus walked the earth. An even larger awakening began to take hold when the true church became aware of the agenda that was filtered through the educational system. Social emotional learning was forced on unsuspecting children, where God and moral absolutes were thrown out of the classroom. Many parents began to homeschool their children as a result of a godless school system. Many of you might be applauding Texas and Oklahoma for insisting that the 10 Commandments be posted or in every classroom. Well, let me tell you something. Depending on the teacher that your child gets, that teacher may be thinking, maybe I'll just put it in a drawer. It's still in the classroom. Or maybe I'll put it in the back of the classroom since none of the kids focus there. They're all up front. These are actual tactics that I have sat in and listened to grade school teachers laughing about. Beware. Beware. Just because a state implements a required posting of the 10 Commandments in every classroom does not mean that the teacher in that classroom is going to bring it to the children's attention, as they should. But that's how much they hate God. That's how much they hate the things of God. Sadly, most professing Christians have not been taught how to be leaders in their communities, so they remain silent for fear of being ostracized from their social groups. I knew way too many women just like that. It appears that they care more about their social standing than they care about the children. Because there are so few leaders, many professing Christians either look just like the rest of the world or they shy away from getting involved and never use their talents. When people turn away from God or they seek Him last, they will be blinded by the confusion tactics used by the enemy. When we understand who God is, however, we are not so easily misled, and we will be able to think clearly amid the fog of war, because, believe it or not, we are at war. In order to keep from being fooled and deceived by the enemy, it will require asking questions. It will be necessary to question the prevailing narrative that is being touted. It will be imperative to seek alternatives and reliable sources of information. It will be necessary to take note of who is behind the mainstream narrative. We have to ask ourselves, are they spirit-filled believers? Or are they the same people pushing for a godless and relativistic society? Jesus warned that in the last days, people would be under a mass delusion due to the power of deception. Critical thinking is greatly needed in these end times. We are called to question everything, even the religious leaders of our day. We are in a fierce spiritual war that includes intense psychological warfare in the physical realm. A critical thinker will stop and ask, but why? Why are the messages that we hear conflicting? It is important to recognize cognitive warfare. It will be necessary to take the time to stop and see reality around you as it truly is, and not what one hears on the mainstream media or cable news network. The enemies of the people have pulled out all of the stops. They use psychological weapons like projection, gaslighting, fear tactic, use of repetition, cognitive dissonance aimed at identity, and illogical premises. Divisive language is being used every day. It is time for us to do our own research using sources that are not dominated by globalist algorithms. In other words, read primary source books and papers. Did you see my episode like 2 or 3 years ago with Mary Graber? Have you witnessed yourself the historical revisionism that has happened in our educational institutions in many states? Howard Zinn has written many textbooks for elementary, I think high school, and probably college students. It's historically revised. It's fully intended to rip this country apart. His writings are fully intended to cause division and to begin weakening our infrastructure. We must pay attention to the facts and draw our own conclusions using the objective scientific method. The facts are there. Trees are falling all over the place. Do not let anyone tell you that they are not. Good people have been dying, but the evil ones are beginning to be exposed. Thank you, Lord. The key is to show others what is happening before it is too late for them. Keep seeking and speaking truth, no matter what. God will guide those who seek Him. You see, this is the advantage that Spirit-filled Christians have over others who do not listen for the voice of God for direction, wisdom, or discernment. Humanity needs God and cannot fight this battle alone. The Apostle Paul warned that the main war is in the spiritual realm, and our fight includes weapons that are not of this world. We have the advantage because we have God's Holy Spirit. When we speak up and step up into our God-given positions, we have the Creator standing with us. We are not called to hide. Christians are called to occupy until our Lord returns. The end game is good versus evil, dark versus light. The church is called to preach the word and make disciples, because the alternative to eternity in heaven with the Creator is an eternity of torment in hell. Christians are called to remain sober because the stakes are so high. Now that you know all of this, what are you doing today to save lives and to advance the kingdom of God? What does God have on your heart? What do you see going on? The incongruities that you can speak up about. What are your talents? Are you an attorney? Are you a doctor? Are you a mom? Are you a professor? Are you a pastor? Everyone needs to take part. I'm Kathryn Camp, and this is the Faith and Culture Commentary Series. I'll see you next time.